Hello and welcome to the fourth lecture in the philosophy of race and racism. Today, I'm going to be discussing an analysis of responsibility, what it means to be responsible to do something, what it means to not be responsible to do stuff, etc. That'll be pretty philosophical, a bit more than is usual, but don't worry. Right after that, we'll jump into Frantz Fanon's Racism and Culture, give you some insights I've pulled out of that I think will help us shape our discussion when we meet. Same with Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous letter from a Birmingham jail and Malcolm X's letter to the grassroots. After that, I'll summarize where we've come, setting us up for what I think and what it usually is a pretty good conversation. All right, analysis of responsibility. Here's the central claim I'm going to try to persuade you is true. Morally relevant contextual features magnify and diminish judgments of moral responsibility. And in addition to this, I think moral judgments of responsibility are sort of like how you cash out whether people are responsible or not. This little jargon here, but don't worry, it'll become clear as we move through. Contextual features, which I identify as relevant to whether somebody is responsible or not, is perceived ability to provide aid or prevent harm, knowledge of that ability, rarity with respect to the ability to provide aid or prevent harm, perceived degree of aid provided or harm prevented, perceived cost of aid provided or harm prevented. We'll walk through these in a little detail. We'll start with these last two first because they're the most obvious. So, suppose John will die unless Susan waves at him. Presumably, Susan has a responsibility to wave at him. There are two relevant questions to consider here. Would it be permissible for Susan to wave at John? Would it be wrong for Susan not to wave at John? I think the first answer is yes. Second is yes. I bet you'd wave to save a life. That's data worth taking seriously. Suppose John's cold symptoms will be cured if Susan cuts off her arm. Presumably, Susan doesn't have a responsibility to cut off her arm. Again, there are two relevant questions to consider here. Would it be permissible for Susan to cut off her arm? Would it be wrong for Susan not to cut off her arm? I think in the first case, yes. In the second, no. I bet you wouldn't cut off your arm. Consider this case. This is a real world case, by the way. This guy, John Harrison, is a real person in the flesh. He has the only blood known that can be used to synthesize a vaccine for rhesus disease. There's no other known cure. It's been claimed his blood has saved over 4 million lives, infants' lives. Rhesus disease affects infants. There are two, again, relevant questions to consider here. Would it be permissible for John to donate? Would it be wrong for him not to? First, yes. Second, yes. I bet you'd donate too. Those are just the two bottom contextual features, right? The perceived degree of aid provided or harm prevented, the perceived cost of aid provided or harm prevented. Both of those influence moral responsibility judgments, and both are contextual features that we can point to. Consider this, rarity with respect to the ability to provide aid or prevent harm. Just think about Harrison, right? John Harrison, like he's very rare. It seems to somewhat magnify his responsibility. Just a sort of matter of luck, though. Like he didn't choose to have blood plasma like that, right? Nevertheless, responsibility seems to track people regardless of whether they intended to be in the positions they are or not. I'll motivate this with a sequence case, or what I call a sequence case. Suppose anyone could donate blood plasma to cure rhesus disease. Suppose we each have a number and are asked in ascending order whether we are willing to donate or not. Suppose everyone knows everyone else's answer, and that each of us, one after the other, declines to donate blood plasma. I know this is a weird case, right? Like, this is absurd. It's the standard sort of philosopher's case. But bear with me for a moment. Just think about it. Okay, so I'm asking you about your intuition, you specifically. Now, you know everybody before you has said no. I think it's true that we all did something wrong. We could have been saving infants just by donating blood plasma. But here's the curious and weird part. It seems the last person did something worse than the first person, you know? And think about if, you were the first person. He said no. And everybody said no, all the way down to the last person. Think about how you'd feel about the last person. Think about if you were the last person looking ahead or looking around. I mean, it's weird, right? It's just weird, but it does seem right. It seems like the last person does have more responsibility than the first. And it is weird, but this is what I'm getting at with the rarity. Rarity influences judgments of moral responsibility. I think it's on display in the case of John Harrison. He's the only person that can donate. I think it's on display even in this weird sequence. Fascinating. Anyway, back to the philosophy. Base moral judgments, I think, are magnified. And there's a base moral judgment I think is true for everyone. Somebody has prima facie, that means default moral responsibility not to harm others. I think that applies to everybody. I think this is magnified based on those contextual features, based on certain contextual features, to the stronger prima facie moral responsibility to provide aid. You get a level up based on those contextual features. So the explanation, I think, stems from, you guessed it, perceived ability to provide aid or prevent harm. If you know you can provide aid, other people know you can provide aid and prevent harm, you're rare, you're the only person who can, the perceived degree of aid provided or harm prevented is great, and the cost of doing it is low, I think that magnifies your responsibility. Roughly speaking, we shouldn't harm others. True. I think that's right. That's the baseline. But if you can help someone a lot with minimal cost to yourself, I think you have a magnified responsibility to provide aid. And I think that is, again, just a magnification of that standing responsibility not to hurt people. It's based on contextual features. And when these things combine, when these contextual features combine, they magnify responsibility more and more. All right, that's the rough and ready outline of responsibility. We'll talk more about it in class, and we'll work through some tough cases, which I called it a calculus, and I'll show you how it works in class. But this sort of calculus, I've used it again and again. I think it gets a lot of the answers you would expect to be right. When you want to say somebody's responsible for something, it's pretty easy to say why they are with this analysis. When you want to say they are not, similarly easy, and I'll show you how. But now let's turn to Fanon. Okay, look, I'm thinking of Fanon now I'm thinking of Fanon sort of responding in a way. All this is not historically true to Locke. Hence, this is what's following Locke. Recall that Locke claimed race was a myth that obscured what was common among groups, which was culture. This is why Locke was so insistent on magnifying culture, like expressing culture. And he thought doing this through art was the best way to make it pure, like pure culture. He, recall, said, "I'm not a race problem," as Du Bois might have suggested. No, I am Alain Locke, and I am expressing unified culture, something that's common in all of us, which can be represented symbolically through art. Now, Locke also suggested if there's going to be political change in the sense, the contemporary sense, like laws protecting the rights of marginalized communities, then mutual understanding is needed. Now, he didn't think this was enough. Mutual understanding wasn't enough, but mutual understanding was going to have to be on the table if there's going to be political respect, right? And so that sort of makes sense, I think, but it also doesn't really give us much guidance as to how to get to political change, right? And I honestly am quite a bit more interested in that latter question, which is to say, if I were talking to Locke, I would say just this: what do we need in addition to mutual understanding to get to political change? This is where I think Fanon enters in the picture pretty starkly. Because I read, and this is not the only, probably not even the best way, I'll be honest with you, to read Fanon, but I think it's an illuminating way nonetheless. But here's what I take some of his target to be. If mutual understanding plus something, then political change. What's that? I think Fanon is approaching a different set of questions than the ones Locke was approaching. Locke thinks that, remember, race is a myth, and Locke is thinking you can express the truth of reality through culture. Fanon thinks culture is a myth. It's a tool to oppress. Colonizers invariably blame problems in colonized groups on culture, which is treated as an innate or essential feature of the group. Like, that's just part of that group's culture. That's what they do. This is something imposed on them, though, Fanon thinks. Colonizers then feel justified in saving colonized groups from themselves. You can just think of the conquistadors, or you can think of like religious groups spreading out through Africa and preaching the gospel, because they are saving the people who lived on the continent. At least so they said. Now, rather than focusing on mutual understanding and culture, then Fanon points to something much more concrete: material change. And you can think of this as something like economic distribution of wealth. The claim I suspect he is making is, if you combine mutual understanding and material change, then political change is on offer. It's not enough to just understand each other. You also have to have economic power to be able to motivate political change. Now, Fanon's essays are always rich, and we're going to come back to it in discussion, but that's just one theme I wanted to talk about here and link it up to the remaining pieces. This will give us a thread of discussion when we do meet. Moving to MLK, and this famous letter from a Birmingham jail, MLK paints a different picture than either Locke or Fanon. Rather than focusing on material change or race or culture, he emphasizes dignity and respect. I read MLK in this letter as focusing on the wrong of racism as it harms individuals, rather than on the harmful consequences of racism. It's sort of a moral move. And you can see this on display in the sort of protesting that MLK advocated, the nonviolent style. Boycotting, holding sit-ins at certain times created economic pressures on white business owners. And this led to opportunities in which members of marginalized groups could exhibit courage in the face of violence without fighting back. MLK, this nonviolent protest move, it was built around taking the moral high ground. When they punch you, stake it. Just take it. When they punch you, take it. Don't fight back. Show them that you are human. Show them that you are dignified. Now, this is a powerful idea. There's a story of a Confederate general during the Civil War, in fact, who was loath to allow enslaved individuals to fight in the war, since he claimed it would make them seem more human and more dignified to white soldiers. I mean, courage, dignity, and respect, they all seem intimately tied together in the presence of violence, and this is this sort of like underpinning motivation. And this powerful idea does seem to underwrite some of MLK's proposals in fighting against racism and engendering political change. Moving now on to an interlocutor of MLK's, Malcolm X. Now he seems, I think, much closer in his thinking to Fanon than either Locke or MLK. He insists, for example, that revolutions are fought over land, not ideas. And this is naturally understood as referring to a material and economic change. So instead of like morals or the moral high ground, it's the ground. And put another way, those in power aren't going to just give you political power because they understand your culture or recognize your dignity. You can understand someone and still treat them poorly. You can respect someone and still treat them poorly. I'll give you several examples when we meet. And powerful people are motivated to keep that power. Genuine political change, Malcolm X argued, requires force. An alignment with people in power will only dilute the power endemic in groups of marginalized individuals, and this is evident in his coffee metaphor. You mix the strong black coffee with cream, and you dilute it, it becomes weaker. And he thought this is a powerful metaphor, I think, for what he's getting at. He's not interested in integrating with the powerful white elite, because that waters down the message, the point. And this, incidentally, is going to be something we discuss in class specifically because Malcolm X in this letter is targeting MLK in particular as getting together with white, elite, powerful individuals and diluting the message. Coming back to this point here, though, I take Malcolm X as claiming if you exhibit power and force, then you'll have material change. If you have material change, then you get your political change. So, just to summarize and relate all these together, you can find at least these four themes in these four authors. For Locke, if you have mutual understanding plus something else, then political change. For Fanon, if you have material change, that should be enough for political change. For MLK, if you have respect, dignity, then political change. And for Malcolm X, force, then political change.